The economy has no concept of enough. Every mechanism in it pushes toward more production, more consumption, more debt, more growth. The word enough does not appear in any macroeconomic model. Its absence is not an oversight, it is the architecture. And yet the question does not go away. It surfaces in the person who reaches the salary they aimed for and finds the target has moved. In the country that doubles its GDP and finds its citizens no less anxious. In the civilization that has produced more material goods than any in history and is conducting the largest uncontrolled experiment in ecological disruption ever attempted. The question surfaces because the system that cannot ask it keeps producing the conditions that make it unavoidable. Start with what enough would actually mean if it were a real economic concept rather than a personal sentiment. Sufficiency is the word some economists use. The condition in which needs are genuinely met, not just survival needs, but the needs for security, for health, for meaningful activity, for belonging, for the capacity to participate in the life of one's society with dignity. The economist Kate Raworth described this as a social foundation. Below it, people lack what they require to live fully human lives. Above it, additional material provision produces diminishing returns in any measure of genuine well-being. This is not mysticism. It is empirical. The data on the relationship between income and subjective well-being, life satisfaction, happiness, the sense that one's life is going well, shows a clear pattern. Below a certain level of material provision, more income produces significant well-being gains. A family moving from poverty to adequacy experiences genuine improvement in every measurable dimension of life. The gains are real, and they should not be minimized. Above a threshold, the number varies by country and context, but in wealthy nations it is reached well below the median income. The relationship between additional income and well-being flattens substantially. Nobel laureates Daniel Kahneman and Angus Deaton found in 2010 that emotional well-being stopped rising with income above roughly $75,000 in the United States at that time. A more recent 2021 study by Matthew Kinneard above that threshold, but with diminishing steepness. The researchers themselves disagree on the exact shape of the curve. What they do not disagree on, it turns to additional income diminish. The economy does not know this, as though more is always better for everyone, everywhere, at every level of existing provision. Now hold the genuine counter-argument, because dismissing growth as a priority requires sitting honestly with what growth has done. Since 1990, the proportion of the global population living in extreme poverty, defined as less than roughly 2.15 cents per day in power terms, has fallen from roughly 36% to under 10%. That is more than 1 billion people who cross the threshold between conditions that genuinely threaten survival and conditions that do not. The material improvements underlying this change in nutrition, in child mortality, in access to clean water, in protection from preventable disease are not statistical abstractions. They are the difference between a child who lives and a child who does not. Growth produced this, imperfectly, unevenly, with enormous costs distributed in ways we have examined throughout this series: ecological costs, colonial costs, costs borne by those displaced by industrialization. The record is not clean, but the result, in terms of the most basic measures of human welfare, is real. The person who argues that growth should stop or that enough has been achieved must answer this. For whom has enough been reached? The wealthy country that declares sufficiency, while a significant fraction of the world remains in conditions of genuine want, is making a political claim about whose enough matters. A claim worth examining carefully before accepting. This tension is real, and it does not resolve cleanly. The growth that lifts the genuinely poor is not the same mechanism as the growth that adds a fourth car to an already wealthy household, but they are not fully separable either. The same productive expansion, the same trade systems, the same capital accumulation that generates poverty reduction also generates the overconsumption and ecological pressure at the high end. Saying stop growth here but not there requires governance capacity that has not been demonstrated at scale. Here is the floor move. In 1930, Keynes predicted that by approximately 2030, Rising productivity would allow people in wealthy countries to work roughly 15 hours per week while maintaining a comfortable standard of living. He was right about the productivity growth. He was substantially wrong about everything else. The productivity gains materialized. The working hours did not fall in proportion. The additional output was consumed rather than converted to leisure. Why? Part of the answer is that genuine needs expanded. Healthcare that did not exist in 1930 now exists and costs money. Education that was not available, expected and costs money. Housing in the cities where work concentrates has become more expensive in real terms, not less. The basket of goods and services required for a dignified life in a modern society is genuinely larger than it was in 1930. Some of the additional work is meeting genuinely new needs. But part of the answer is what we examined when we looked at consumption. The economic system has an interest in converting leisure into consumption rather than rest. The person watching television is consuming. The person sitting quietly in a garden is not. The GDP counts one and not the other. The advertising industry, whose purpose is to convert time into purchasing decisions, had no product to sell the person who decided the 15-hour week was sufficient. The expansion of consumer desire into every available hour of time was not incidental to the economic system. It was the response to the problem that productivity would otherwise have produced, too much supply for the demand that genuine need generated. Thorstein Veblen saw the shape of this in 1899. The leisure class, he argued, set the standards of consumption that those below aspired to match. The aspiration drove work, which drove production, which drove the economy. The aspiration was not toward sufficiency, but toward the position of those above. The target moved as those above moved further above. The working person was not running toward an achievable destination. They were running on a treadmill whose speed was set by the visible consumption of those ahead of them. The mechanism is still running. Status competition, the drive to match or exceed the consumption level of one's reference group, is one of the most powerful documented drivers of consumer spending in wealthy economies. The economist Robert Frank has argued that much of the consumption growth in wealthy countries over the last 50 years is better described as an arms race than as genuine preference satisfaction, each individual's rational response to the consumption of others around them, producing an outcome that is collectively irrational in that everyone would be better off if everyone spent less, but no individual can safely make that choice unilaterally. This is not a moral failing of individuals. It is a predictable outcome of a social structure in which consumption communicates status, status determines social position, and social position determines access to opportunities and treatment that have real material consequences. The person who consumes at a visibly lower level than their peers in certain social contexts does not merely feel bad. They may actually receive worse outcomes in job interviews, in social networks, in the subtle allocations of respect and access that determine how a life unfolds. The consumption is not purely psychological. It is buying into a social system that has real stakes. Now look at what enough would require at the institutional level. Not as aspiration, but as engineering. The current global economic system is built on the necessity of growth. As we examined when we looked at debt and banking, the money supply is primarily created through interest-bearing loans that require growth to service. A no-growth economy with debt-based money faces deflation, unemployment, and financial instability. The system is engineered for expansion. Sufficiency as a steady state requires different institutional architecture, different relationships between money creation and growth, different measures of success, different objectives for monetary and fiscal policy. The economist Herman Daly spent his career designing the outline of what he called a steady-state economy, one that maintains a stable throughput of energy and materials rather than perpetually expanding it, that aims at qualitative development rather than quantitative growth, that distinguishes between growth in volume and improvement in quality of life. The intellectual architecture exists. The political pathway to implementing it in any major economy does not currently exist. For reasons that are structural, those who benefit from the growth imperative have the political resources to maintain it, and historical, no major economy has successfully transitioned from growth dependence to genuine steady state. This should be stated plainly. The path from where we are to an economy that genuinely operates within ecological limits, that treats sufficiency as a real goal rather than a rhetorical one, is not known with any confidence. The proposals are serious and worth engaging. The implementation at scale has not been demonstrated. Intellectual honesty requires acknowledging the gap between the diagnosis and the demonstrated solution. What is less uncertain is the trajectory of the current path. The ecological signals, atmospheric carbon, biodiversity loss, freshwater depletion, ocean acidification, are moving in one direction. The productive capacity of the economy depends on ecological systems that are being degraded by the operation of that economy. The system is consuming the conditions of its own continuation. At some point, that produces a constraint that is not chosen but imposed. Now bring this into your life, not as civilizational concern but as daily texture. You make economic decisions every day under the implicit assumption that more is better. More income, more savings, more security, more provision for the future. Each decision is rational in isolation. The income you do not earn is insecurity. The saving you do not do is exposure. The accumulation you forego is the life you cannot afford later. The logic is real. The pressures generating it are real. But somewhere in the accumulation, most people, not all but most, encounter a moment where the accumulation does not deliver what it was supposed to deliver. Where the security that was promised by the next increment of income does not arrive. Where the life that was supposed to begin after a certain number is reached turns out to require a different number. That moment is not unique to any particular income level. It visits people across the wealth distribution, though it visits them differently. The person earning barely enough has genuine scarcity. The person earning abundantly has something else. A system that has successfully convinced them that abundance is not yet sufficient, that more is still required, that the destination is always slightly ahead of where they are. The question is not whether you want more. Of course you do. The system you were born into was designed to ensure you would. The question is whether the wanting is yours. Whether, if you sat with what you actually have, what you actually need, what actually produces the moments in your life that feel most worth living, the number you are working toward would be the same number. And if it would not, whose number is it?